He was a titan of tech, on the verge of losing it all, fueled by coffee and a burning resentment for the woman he claimed had ruined him. She was the ghost of his past, a memory he had reshaped into a caricature of greed and betrayal. Ethan Hayes told anyone who would listen that his ex-wife Sophia was a ruthless gold digger who bled him dry and abandoned him. But in the pristine, unforgiving world of venture capital, ghosts don't stay buried. The anonymous investor who held the fate of his company in their hands was about to teach him that the truth is often more terrifying and more spectacular than the lies we tell ourselves. The stale scent of day-old pizza and palpable desperation clung to the air in the open plan office of Nexus Logistics. It was the smell of a dream dying. Ethan Hayes, CEO and co-founder, stared at the cash flow projection on his monitor. The glowing red numbers feeling less like data and more like a verdict. They were 90 days from insolvency, 90 days from his magnum opus, his rebellion against a world of mediocrity becoming another forgotten casualty of the startup graveyard. He ran a hand through his already disheveled brown hair, the gesture sharp with frustration. At 34, he still had the lean, hungry look of his college days, but it was now underscored by the dark smudges of sleepless nights and the tight set of his jaw. He had poured every cent, every waking hour, every drop of his soul into Nexus Logistics, an AI-driven platform designed to revolutionize supply chain management. It was brilliant, it was visionary, and it was bleeding money like a severed artery. "Any word?" Ben Carter, his co-founder, and the calming yin to his chaotic yang, asked from the adjacent desk. Ben was meticulously organizing lines of code, his methodical nature a stark contrast to Ethan's explosive energy. "Silence," Ethan grumbled, minimizing the spreadsheet of doom. "Every VC in Silicon Valley has seen our pitch. They love the tech, they love the model, and then they see the burn rate and run for the hills. We're too big a risk." "We just need one to bite," Ben said, his voice laced with a familiar weary optimism. "One believer." Ethan scoffed a bitter grating sound. "Believers. Yeah, I've had my fill of those." He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the squeak echoing in the cavernous, mostly empty office space they could no longer afford. "You know who was a believer, Sophia?" Ben sighed, stopping his typing. He knew this path well. It was Ethan's favorite road, paved with resentment and self-pity. "Ethan, don't." "No, seriously," Ethan pressed on, his voice rising. "She believed in the big house, the fancy car, the trips to Monaco. She believed in the result, not the process. The moment things got tough, the moment my own savings had to go into the company, instead of a new designer handbag for her, she was gone." Yet the narrative was so well rehearsed, so polished from repeated tellings, that Ethan almost believed it himself. He and Sophia Rossi had been married for 5 years. 5 years that in his revised history were a long con where she played the part of the supportive wife while waiting for the IPA that would be her grand payday. "That's not fair," Ben said quietly, though he knew it was pointless to argue. "Sophia was there from the beginning. She was at the first pitch meeting, the one in that dingy coffee shop, where you spilled latte on the investor's shoes." "A performance," Ethan shot back, slamming his hand lightly on the desk. "She was playing a role, the supportive, unassuming partner, all while her eyes were on the prize. The second our divorce was finalized, she took the settlement, every penny the lawyers could get her, and vanished. Probably sunning herself in the Caymans with some crypto bro. A classic gold digger Ben. She dug for gold, found the mine was running dry, and got out before the collapse. He conveniently forgot that the settlement had been modest, barely enough to cover her legal fees and a deposit on a small apartment. He forgot that she had worked 2 jobs in their early years to support them while he coded Nexus Logistics into existence in their cramped apartment. He forgot her quiet encouragement, her belief in him when no one else did. His wounded pride had papered over those memories with the wallpaper of betrayal. It was easier to blame her than to face the terrifying possibility that he, Ethan Hayes, the boy genius, might simply fail. She called me a dreamer once. Ethan continued, his voice dripping with scorn. But she didn't mean it as a compliment. She meant I was unrealistic. She wanted the guaranteed payout, not the struggle. When I told her I was mortgaging the house to fund the second seed round, you should have seen her face. Pure terror. Not for me, not for us, for her safety net. Ben stayed silent, letting his friend vent. The truth was, Ben had always liked Sophia. He saw a quiet strength in her, a depth that Ethan, in his whirlwind of ambition, had seemed to overlook. Ben remembered Sophia bringing homemade dinners to the office during late nights, asking intelligent questions about the software architecture and calming Ethan down during his frequent moments of near-manic panic. The woman Ethan described sounded like a stranger. Ethan's rant was cut short by the ping of an incoming email. He glanced at his screen, his expression shifting from anger to weary curiosity. The subject line was stark and impersonal. Subject: investment inquiry, Nexus Logistics. His heart gave a little flutter. Another rejection, probably. A polite, "We'll keep you in our thoughts," email. He clicked it open. To Ethan Hayes, CEO, from Evelyn Reed Senior, Analyst, AR Ventures, Mr. Hayes. We have been following the progress of Nexus Logistics with considerable interest. Your technology has disruptive potential, but your current financial trajectory is unsustainable. My principal is interested in exploring a potential Series A investment to facilitate a strategic pivot and ensure long-term viability. This would not be a standard investment. We would require a majority stake, 2 board seats, and final say on all budgetary and strategic decisions for the next 24 months. If these preliminary terms are not immediately disqualifying, I am available to meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. at our offices. Regards, Evelyn Reed, AR Ventures, 1 Embarcadero Center, San Francisco. Ethan read it twice, then a third time. AR Ventures. He'd never heard of them. The name was generic, almost deliberately obscure, but the address was prime real estate. And the tone of the email, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a demand. Majority stake, final say. They wanted to buy his company, gut it, and run it themselves. What is it? Ben asked, noticing the color drain from Ethan's face. Ethan swiveled his monitor around. Ben leaned in, his eyes scanning the text. He let out a low whistle. A majority stake. They want to take the whole thing, Ethan. This is a vulture fund picking at the carcass. Maybe, Ethan said, a strange light glinting in his eyes. Or maybe it's the only lifeboat left. He looked around the silent office at the empty desks and the motivational posters that now seemed to mock him. Disrupt or be disrupted. This isn't an investor, Ethan. It's a dictator, Ben warned. You'd be CEO in name only. You'd lose control of your own creation. My creation is about to be homeless and unemployed. Ethan countered, his voice raw. I'll be the CEO of absolutely nothing in 3 months. Control, I've lost control already. The numbers on that spreadsheet are in control now. He thought of Sophia. The bitterness churned in his gut. This was her fault. Her lack of faith, her abandonment had set this failure in motion. At least that's the story he told himself. Now, some faceless, soulless corporate entity was offering him a humiliating deal to save the company he had once promised her would change the world. The irony was a bitter pill, but swallowing a bitter pill was better than choking on failure. He turned back to his keyboard and began to type. Ms. Reed. The terms are aggressive, but not disqualifying. I will be there at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Ethan Hayes. As he hit send, he felt a cold dread mix with a flicker of hope. He was making a deal with the devil to save his dream. He had no idea that the devil he imagined was nothing compared to the ghost he had spent years trying to exorcise. The lobby of 1 Embarcadero Center was designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings, acres of polished marble, and a silence so profound it seemed to absorb sound. It was the cathedral of capital, and Ethan felt like a blasphemer entering the pews, dressed in his best and only suit, which felt a size too tight and a decade out of style. He approached the security desk, his own reflection, a pale, anxious stranger in the mirrored walls. Ethan Hayes to see Evelyn Reed, AR Ventures. The guard checked his list with an air of bored authority before gesturing him towards a dedicated elevator bank. 45th floor. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. As the doors opened, Ethan stepped into the offices of AR Ventures. There was no bustling bullpen, no noise, no chaos. It was a serene, minimalist space, decorated in shades of charcoal and cream, with panoramic views of the San Francisco Bay. It whispered of quiet, immense wealth. The kind of wealth that didn't need to shout. A woman rose from behind a stark white desk to greet him. She was perhaps in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe chignon, and a bespoke pantsuit that probably cost more than his monthly payroll. Her eyes behind sharp designer glasses were intelligent and completely unreadable. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Evelyn Reed. Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, her voice crisp. She didn't offer a smile. "This way." She led him to a conference room, dominated by a single massive slab of dark wood. The view of the Golden Gate Bridge was breathtaking, a calculated display of power. He was being shown just how small he was in the grand scheme of things. "Please," she gestured to a chair. "Coffee water." "Water is fine, thank you." Evelyn poured him a glass from a frosted pitcher before taking a seat opposite him, placing a slim tablet on the table between them. "Let's not waste each other's time, Mr. Hayes. You're out of cash. Your last two potential clients went with a competitor. Your CTO quit 2 months ago, and you've been unable to fill the position. You are, for all intents and purposes, dead in the water." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his pride. He just nodded his throat tight. "Your information is accurate." It always is, she stated, not as a boast, but as a fact. "My principal believes in your core technology. The predictive logistics algorithm is, and I quote, exceptionally elegant. However, the execution and business strategy have been lacking. I've been working with limited resources." Ethan defended, his voice strained. "You've been working with a limited vision," Evelyn countered smoothly. "You've been focused on acquiring a handful of large enterprise-level clients, a long and expensive sales cycle. You've ignored the far more lucrative market of mid-sized e-commerce businesses who would pay a premium for even a 5% increase in efficiency." Ethan stared at her. She had just laid out the exact pivot he and Ben had discussed in hushed, desperate tones just weeks ago. A pivot they lacked the capital to even attempt. "Who is your principal?" Ethan asked, unable to hold back the question. "Who is behind AR Ventures?" Evelyn offered the faintest hint of a smile, a slight upward twitch of her lips. "My principal values privacy above all else. You will communicate with us through me. The name is non-negotiable. For all official purposes, you are dealing with AR Ventures, a private equity firm. Is that a problem?" "It's unorthodox. We are not an orthodox firm," she replied, tapping her tablet. A detailed financial model of Nexus Logistics appeared on the large screen on the wall. "Here is our offer. $10 million, wired to your account within 48 hours of signing. This will cover your debts, allow for a 50% staff increase, and fund an aggressive 18-month marketing strategy targeting the mid-market sector. $10 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a mirage. It was more than he had dreamed of. It was salvation. "In exchange," she continued, her voice hardening slightly, "we take a 51% equity stake. We appoint 2 members to the board of directors, myself, and a representative from our legal team. Your co-founder, Mr. Carter, will be offered the role of Chief Technology Officer with a significant salary increase. His position is non-negotiable. Ethan blinked. They had researched Ben too. They saw his value perhaps even more than Ethan had acknowledged recently. "And me?" Ethan asked. "You will remain CEO," Evelyn said. "However, any expenditure over $50,000, any hiring or firing of senior staff, and any strategic shift will require board approval. Our approval. You will have a generous salary, a performance-based bonus structure, and all the resources you need to succeed. But you will have a boss. To be perfectly clear, Mr. Hayes, we are investing in your algorithm, not your autonomy." It was a gilded cage, the most beautiful, well-appointed prison he could imagine. He would be the face of the company, but the soul would belong to the ghost in the machine, this mysterious principal who dissected his company from afar. He thought of the alternative, the humiliating phone call to his father admitting he'd failed, the crushing weight of letting Ben down, the smug "I told you so" he imagined on Sophia's face, wherever she was. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Your principal, they're in tech?" he asked, grasping for any detail. "My principal has a diverse portfolio, but possesses a deep and practical understanding of software architecture and market dynamics," Evelyn said evasively. "All you need to know is that our guidance will be precise, informed, and non-negotiable." He looked out the window at the bridge, a marvel of engineering and ambition. Someone had to dream it, and someone else had to fund it. He had been the dreamer. Now he needed a funder, even one who would put him in chains. "You'll have the signed documents by the end of the day," Ethan said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. Evelyn Reed nodded, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, perhaps satisfaction in her eyes. "A wise decision, Mr. Hayes. Welcome to our ventures." As he walked out of the building and back into the normal world, the San Francisco fog rolling in felt less like weather and more like a metaphor for his future. He had saved his company, but he felt strangely like he had just sold his soul. The check would be real, the jobs would be safe, the technology would live on, but he was no longer a master of his own destiny. He was a high-priced employee, a puppet for a phantom investor who knew his every weakness. And as he hailed a cab, a bitter thought surfaced, even at his lowest. Sophia had only taken a small settlement. This new partner had taken everything. The first year of their marriage was lived in a blur of cheap wine, takeout cartons, and shared dreams whispered in the dark. Their apartment in Mountain View was small, with peeling paint and a temperamental furnace, but it felt like a palace. Ethan, then a junior programmer at a large tech firm, would come home buzzing with ideas, sketching algorithms on napkins, while Sophia, a paralegal at a small family law practice, would listen, her chin resting on her hand, her dark eyes filled with a fierce, quiet pride. "It's not just about moving boxes, Soph," he'd explain, his hands waving animatedly. "It's about prediction. It's about seeing the future of a supply chain. We could eliminate waste, save companies millions, make everything faster, smarter." "I know, Ethan," she'd say, her smile soft and genuine. "I believe you. It's brilliant." She was the one who encouraged him to quit his stable job. "You're suffocating there," she had told him one evening as they sat on their lumpy sofa. "This idea, Nexus, it's what you're meant to do. We'll manage. I can pick up more hours. We'll make it work." He had resisted, terrified of the instability. It was her faith that had given him the courage to take the leap. She sold her reliable sedan, a graduation gift from her parents, and used the money to buy him a top-of-the-line computer and 3 months of server space. "An investment in our future," she'd called it, kissing him amidst a tangle of Ethernet cables. Those were the memories his pride had worked so hard to bury. In his mind, the Sophia of the past had become a two-dimensional villain, but the truth was a far more complex and painful photograph. The cracks began to show, not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping erosion. As Nexus Logistics gained a little traction and secured its first round of angel funding, Ethan changed. The frantic energy that had once been charmingly passionate curdled into a relentless, all-consuming obsession. He stopped coming home for dinner. The whispered dreams were replaced by terse, late-night phone calls about term sheets and server latency. He saw his sacrifice as noble. He was building an empire for them. He failed to see that she wasn't interested in an empire. She was interested in a partnership. The fight that he would later twist into his proof of her greed happened on a Tuesday. He came home buzzing with a dangerous energy, waving a stack of papers. "We got it," he announced, his eyes wild with victory. "A bridge loan, $500,000. It's enough to hire a real sales team." Sophia looked at the papers, her brow furrowed. "Ethan, it's a second mortgage on the house. The interest rate is insane." Their small house, their first major purchase, was their only real asset. "It's business, Soph. You have to be aggressive. You have to take risks," he said, dismissing her concern. "I believe in taking risks," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I don't believe in betting our home on a maybe. What happens if it doesn't work out? We lose everything." "Unbelievable," he scoffed, throwing the papers on the counter. "This is what I'm talking about. You don't get it. You don't have the stomach for this." "The stomach for what? For being homeless?" she shot back, her voice rising for the first time. "I have a stomach for hard work, Ethan. I've been working 60-hour weeks to make sure our bills are paid while you chase this dream. Don't you dare tell me I don't have the stomach for it. This isn't about your little paralegal job." He snapped the words instantly regrettable. "This is the big leagues. This is about creating generational wealth. Isn't that what you want? The nice things, the security." He was projecting his own fears and ambitions onto her. He was the one who craved the validation of wealth, the status that came with a successful exit. He had started Nexus to change the world, but somewhere along the way, it had become about proving he was a titan. Her face fell. The anger drained away, replaced by a profound, chilling sadness. "Generational wealth? Is that what you think I want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I wanted a life with you, Ethan. The man who drew ideas on napkins. I don't even know who you are anymore." That was the moment the marriage truly broke. They coexisted for another year, two strangers sharing a mortgage. He saw her quiet withdrawal as disapproval, her pleas for him to take a vacation as a distraction from his vital work. He interpreted her worry as a lack of faith in his genius. The divorce was quiet and brutal. He hired a shark of a lawyer who painted Sophia as opportunistic. She in turn hired a modest, practical attorney and asked for very little, just enough to start over free from the crushing weight of his ambition. Ethan, deep in his own narrative of victimhood, saw this not as an act of dignity, but as a sign of weakness. She knew she couldn't get any more, he told Ben. She took what she could and ran. One final petty act cemented his view of her. His grandfather's vintage wristwatch, a treasured heirloom, went missing during the move-out. It was a beautiful, simple timepiece, a symbol of a bygone era of craftsmanship and integrity. He accused her of taking it, of pawning it for cash. "It's just a watch, Ethan," she had said, her eyes weary with a sadness he mistook for guilt. "You have so much already." He didn't hear the subtext, that he had so much and valued so little. He only heard a confession. In his mind, she had sold a piece of his family's history for a few $100s. She was in his final judgment, a woman with no soul, no loyalty, only a calculator where her heart should be. This was the architecture of his grudge, a foundation of misinterpreted intentions, walls of projected insecurity, and a roof of wounded pride. He had built it meticulously, brick by brick, until he could live inside it, safe from the truth that he had been the one who dismantled their life together, so focused on building his monument that he never noticed he was using the stones from his own home. Life, under the reign of AR Ventures, was a jarring new reality. The $10 million arrived as promised, a staggering sum that cleared their debts overnight and filled the company coffers. The office, once a tomb of impending failure, buzzed with new energy. They hired a dozen of the brightest engineers and marketing minds in the Bay Area. The pivot to the mid-market sector, once a desperate fantasy, was now a meticulously executed strategy guided by the unseen hand of the principal. The guidance came exclusively through Evelyn Reed. She was a constant, formidable presence. Her emails were terse and brilliant. Her weekly calls were interrogations disguised as check-ins. She would dissect their progress reports with surgical precision, her questions revealing a terrifyingly deep understanding of their business. "Mr. Hayes," she said. During one such call, her voice cool and impassive through the speakerphone, "Your customer acquisition cost is 7% higher than our projections. The data suggests your digital ad spend is over-indexed on LinkedIn and under-indexed on targeted industry podcasts. Please adjust the allocation by end of day." Ethan, who had once prided himself on his marketing instincts, was silenced. She was right. He and his new marketing head had looked at the same data and missed it completely. Ben, in his new role as CTO, was thriving. Freed from the constant anxiety of bankruptcy, he dove into refining the algorithm. The principal, via Evelyn, would send occasional cryptic notes of feedback on the code itself. "Ben, I got another one," he said one afternoon, walking over to Ethan's desk, looking baffled. He held up his phone. "It just says, consider a recursive function for the batch processing query. Will reduce server load during peak hours." Who is this person? They're looking at our raw code. They're a programmer, Ethan. A damn good one. Ethan felt a knot of resentment tighten in his stomach. He was the CEO, but he felt like an imposter in his own company. He was living in the gilded cage, and the bars felt colder every day. He had the corner office, now the one with the best view, but it felt borrowed. He was executing someone else's vision, a vision that was infuriatingly working perfectly. Within 6 months, Nexus Logistics had signed over 40 new clients. Their monthly recurring revenue shot past figures he had only dreamed of. They were the new darlings of the tech press, a phoenix from the ashes story. And in every interview, Ethan had to smile and talk about his visionary strategy, all while knowing the true visionary was a ghost named Principal. His obsession with the investor's identity grew into a fever. He tried searching for AR Ventures, but the digital footprint was almost non-existent. It was a shell corporation. Within a shell corporation, a financial nesting doll designed for ultimate anonymity. The A and the R must be initials. Adam Reed, Arthur Roberts. He spent late nights scrolling through lists of high-net-worth individuals, tech billionaires, and retired CEOs looking for a match. It was a fruitless, maddening exercise. The control was absolute. When Ethan wanted to acquire a small, promising logistics startup, Evelyn shut it down with a one-line email. "Their code is inefficient and their market is a dead end. Do not pursue." 2 months later, that same startup went bankrupt. The principal's foresight was unnervingly perfect. The new board meetings were sterile, efficient affairs. It was Ethan and Ben on one side of the giant table, and Evelyn Reed and a silent, hawk-eyed lawyer named Mr. Davies on the other. They didn't debate, they were given directives. "We will be opening a European headquarters in Dublin within the next quarter," Evelyn announced at one meeting. "The groundwork has already been laid." "Dublin?" Ethan asked, flabbergasted. "I thought Germany made more sense for the manufacturing base." "You thought wrong," Evelyn stated, not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. "The Irish market provides a more favourable tax structure and a larger pool of multilingual tech talent. A location has been scouted. A list of potential candidates for the general manager position will be on your desk by Monday." Ethan felt a surge of hot fury. And I'm supposed to just go along with this. I'm the CEO. Evelyn looked at him, her expression uncharacteristically patient. Mr. Hayes, you are an excellent product visionary. Your original algorithm is proof of that. But your operational and strategic instincts are frankly your weakness. We are providing the scaffolding you need to build your skyscraper. Do you want to argue about the quality of the steel, or do you want to see the building finished? He slumped back in his chair, defeated. She was right. He hated that she was right. He hated the anonymous principal for being right. He hated this feeling of being a passenger in the high-speed vehicle his life had become. The money, the success, the praise, it all felt hollow. It wasn't truly his. He was a fraud, propped up by a mystery benefactor. He would walk through his bustling office, see the happy, productive employees, and feel a profound sense of alienation. He had saved the company, only to lose himself. And through it all, the ghost of Sophia lingered. Sometimes, in moments of triumph, he would feel a pang of regret. He wished he could show her that he had made it just to prove her wrong. The success felt tainted, but it was success nonetheless. He pictured her living her simple life, completely oblivious to the empire he was now managing. The thought gave him a small petty satisfaction. He clung to his grudge because it was the only thing that felt entirely his own. It was the one part of his story that the principal couldn't control. The seed of doubt was planted on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Ethan was in a rare moment of peace, walking through a small park near the office to clear his head, when he bumped into Maya Lynn, a mutual friend from his and Sophia's early days. Maya was an artist, a woman who moved through the world with an observant gentleness that Ethan had always found a bit naive. Ethan Hayes. My God, I read about you in TechCrunch. You're a rock star. She greeted him with a warm hug. Hardly. He laughed, a bit uncomfortable with the praise. Just trying to keep the ship afloat. You're doing more than that from the sounds of it. It's amazing, she said. I'm so happy for you. Sophia would be too. Ethan's smile tightened. I doubt that. We don't exactly keep in touch. Maya tilted her head, a confused frown on her face. Really? That's a shame. You know, for all that happened, she was always your biggest fan. It was never about the money for her, Ethan. You know that, right? We had different ideas about what success looked like. He said, the old rehearsed line coming out automatically. I guess, Maya said, though she looked unconvinced. I just remember her selling her car to buy you that first supercomputer. And remember when she took on all that freelance legal transcription work, staying up all night, just so you could afford to go to that tech conference in Austin. She came to my studio once, utterly exhausted, and all she could talk about was how your keynote was going to blow everyone away. She had this absolute faith in your brilliance. Ethan stood frozen on the wet pavement. He had forgotten that. He'd forgotten the all-nighters she pulled, the sacrifices she made that he'd taken for granted. In his narrative, she was the one holding him back, afraid of risk. But Maya's words painted a different picture, a woman who had shouldered immense risk for him, who had worked herself to the bone, not for a future payday, but because she believed in his dream. The memory of the car, the conference, it was like a key turning in a long-locked room in his mind. The carefully constructed walls of his grudge trembled. I had forgotten about that, he admitted, his voice quiet. Well, don't, Maya said softly. Whatever happened between you two, don't forget that part. It was real. The conversation unsettled him for days. He found himself replaying old memories, but this time through a new lens. Her fear over mortgaging the house, was it greed, or was it genuine terror of losing their shared sanctuary? Her withdrawal during their last year together, was it disapproval, or was it the quiet grief of a woman watching her husband disappear into his own ambition? The next crack in his narrative came from an unexpected source, Evelyn Reed. They were in a late-night meeting finalizing the acquisition of a small German analytics firm, a move the principal had identified as critical for their European expansion. The deal was complex, the negotiations fraught. Ethan was exhausted and on edge. Their founder is playing hardball, Ethan vented, pacing his office. He's posturing, trying to squeeze another 200 grand out of us. He's not posturing, he's scared, Evelyn said calmly, reviewing the documents on her screen from her own office across town. His father founded that company. He feels like he's selling his family legacy. The money is secondary to his pride. So what do we do? Walk away? No, Evelyn said. You appeal to that legacy. You insert a clause that keeps him on as a paid consultant for 2 years and name the new integrated software module after his father. You give him dignity, not just cash. It shows respect for the work, not just the asset. Ethan stopped pacing. The advice was shrewd, insightful, and deeply empathetic. It was a move that went beyond the cold calculus of business. It was human. It didn't fit his image of the ruthless, faceless principal. That's a good idea, he conceded. It's the correct one, Evelyn replied. Sometimes people just want to know that what they built mattered. There was a brief pause, and in that silence, Evelyn said something that would haunt him. My principal has a strong belief in honoring the foundations of things. Honoring the foundations. The phrase echoed in his mind. It sounded so unlike a corporate raider. That weekend, driven by a strange compulsion he didn't understand, he went up to his attic. He was looking for old company prototypes, but he found himself rummaging through a box labeled Old Memories. Inside were photos from the early years of his marriage. There they were smiling on a beach, covered in paint, from renovating their first home, holding the keys to the house he had later risked without her consent. He saw the woman Maya had described, bright, loving, and full of hope. Then he found an empty velvet box. It was the box for his grandfather's watch. The anger, so familiar and comforting, flared up again. This was the proof. This was the real Sophia, the woman who would steal a family heirloom. He slammed the box shut, the dust motes dancing in the dim light. Maya was a romantic. Evelyn Reed was just a clever negotiator. Sophia was a thief. He needed to believe it. It was the only thing holding his version of the world together. But the foundation was cracked. The lie was unraveling, whether he was ready to admit it or not. Nexus Logistics was no longer a startup. It was an institution. The acquisition of the German firm was a resounding success, and their new European headquarters was thriving. They were now valued at over $900 million, and a major tech conglomerate, a giant in the industry, had made an official acquisition offer. It was the exit Ethan had once dreamed of, a multi-billion-dollar deal that would make him and his anonymous partner titans of the industry. The final meeting to approve the sale was scheduled. The conglomerate's CEO would be there, and for the first time, the principal of AR Ventures had agreed to attend in person. They're finally going to show themselves, Ben asked, his eyes wide with disbelief as they stood in Ethan's office. After all this time, who do you think it is? I don't know, and I don't care. Ethan lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. Let's just close this deal and be done with it. The meeting was set for the 50th floor of a different skyscraper, a neutral territory chosen by the conglomerate. Ethan felt a nervous energy he hadn't experienced since his first pitch meeting. This was it, the culmination of everything. He would finally come face to face with the puppet master who had saved and controlled him. He imagined a Howard Hughes-like recluse, a grizzled Wall Street legend, or a young, arrogant tech prodigy who had made his fortune in crypto. He and Ben rode the elevator up in silence. They walked into the boardroom, a magnificent space with a 360-degree view of the city. The CEO of the conglomerate, a well-known industry figure named David Chen, was already there along with his team. Evelyn Reed stood by the window, a picture of calm authority. "Ethan, Ben, good to see you," Chen said, shaking their hands warmly. "A remarkable company you've built." "We had good partners," Ethan replied, glancing at Evelyn. She gave a slight nod. My principal is on their way. They all took their seats around the enormous table. The air was thick with anticipation. Ethan's leg bounced nervously under the table. He fiddled with the cuff of his expensive, custom-tailored shirt, a shirt bought with the money the principal had provided. The door to the boardroom opened. Ethan looked up, expecting to see a man in a power suit. Instead, a woman walked in. She was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant low ponytail. Her face was one he knew better than his own, yet it was completely transformed. The uncertainty he remembered was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. The sadness in her eyes had been supplanted by a sharp, clear-eyed intelligence. It was Sophia Rossi. The world tilted on its axis. The air left Ethan's lungs in a silent gasp. He felt the blood drain from his face. It was as if a ghost had materialized in the room, but this was no phantom. This was real. Ben stared, his mouth agape. David Chen and his team looked on, confused by the sudden palpable tension. Evelyn Reed was the only one who seemed unsurprised. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "may I introduce the founder and principal of AR Ventures, Ms. Sophia Rossi." Sophia's eyes met Ethan's. There was no malice in them, no triumph, just a calm, level gaze that seemed to see right through him, through all the years of lies and resentment, and into the broken core of the man he was. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice even and steady. It was the same voice that had once whispered encouragement in their tiny apartment, now wielded with the authority of a kingmaker. Ethan couldn't speak. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion, humiliation, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. AR Ventures. AR. Arthur Rossi. Her initials. Sophia Amelia Rossi. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own narrative that he'd missed the most obvious clue. "You," he finally managed to stammer, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How—" "My grandmother," Sophia said simply, taking a seat at the head of the table, a spot that was clearly hers. She was a very shrewd woman who lived a very simple life. She invested in some tech companies in the early 80s. Apple, Microsoft. She left me a small portfolio when she passed. I let it grow. She paused, letting the information sink in. "I never told you because I knew you. You would have seen it as your seed money, your resource to burn through. It was mine, and I chose to invest it wisely." Every word was a blow. Her quiet life, her modest job, it had all been a choice. She had possessed a fortune he couldn't have imagined, all while he was calling her a gold digger for wanting to protect their small home. "You knew I was going to fail," he said, the accusation weak, pathetic. "No," Sophia corrected him gently. "I knew your idea was going to succeed. I also knew your pride and your arrogance were going to get in the way. I didn't invest in you, Ethan, not the you that you had become. I invested in Nexus Logistics, and I put safeguards in place, Evelyn, the board, the strict oversight to protect my investment from your worst instincts." Her explanation of the pivot to the mid-market, her analysis of his flawed strategy, her deep understanding of his code, it all crashed down on him. The principal, who had seen his weaknesses so clearly, was the person who had once known him best. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on him, stealing his breath. Every angry word he had ever spoken about her, every bitter complaint to Ben, every self-pitying monologue, she had been the one signing his paychecks the entire time. She had listened to him call her a gold digger while she was single-handedly funding his redemption. He thought of his grandfather's watch, the final damning piece of evidence of her supposed greed. As if reading his mind, Sophia reached into her handbag. She pulled out a small, soft leather pouch and slid it across the polished table towards him. "I kept this for you," she said. "You were so chaotic when we separated, I was afraid you'd lose it. I was waiting for the right moment to give it back." He slowly opened the pouch. Inside, gleaming under the boardroom lights, was his grandfather's watch. It was ticking. That was the moment he finally completely broke. It wasn't just about the money or the company. It was the crushing, undeniable proof of his own monstrous delusion. He hadn't just been wrong about her. He had been cruel. He had slandered her name and her character to anyone who would listen, all while she was quietly, brilliantly, and generously saving him from himself. He looked at her, truly. Looked at her for the first time in years. Not as his ex-wife, not as a ghost from his past, but as the formidable, intelligent, and graceful woman sitting at the head of the table. The woman who had outplayed him in every conceivable way, not for revenge, but because she believed in the one good thing he had created. The room was silent. David Chen and his team looked back and forth between them, finally understanding that this wasn't just a business deal. It was a reckoning. Ethan Hayes, the tech titan, the comeback kid, had never felt so small. The billion-dollar acquisition was put on hold. David Chen, sensing the seismic emotional shift in the room, tactfully suggested they table the final decision for a week to allow the partners of Nexus Logistics to align internally. It was a corporate euphemism for deal with the apocalyptic drama that just unfolded. As soon as Chen's team had left, Ben let out a long, slow breath. "I think I'll go get us some coffee," he said, giving Ethan and Sophia a wide berth as he practically fled the room. He was a good friend, and he knew this was a conversation that could only happen between two people. For a long time, neither Ethan nor Sophia spoke. The silence in the cavernous boardroom was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. Ethan stared at the watch in his hand, its steady, ticking a counterpoint to the chaotic drumming of his heart. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers. The anger was gone. The pride was shattered. All that was left was a raw, gaping shame. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt laughably inadequate, a tiny bandage on a mortal wound. "Sophia, there are no words. What I said about you, what I thought," he trailed off, shaking his head. It was monstrous. Sophia simply nodded, her expression patient, waiting. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, nor was she going to rub salt in the wound. She was simply going to let him sit with the truth. "I built a whole story in my head," he continued, his voice cracking. "A story where I was the victim and you were the villain. It was easier than admitting that I was failing, that I was scared, that I had become so obsessed with being a success that I destroyed the only thing that actually mattered." He looked at her, his gaze unflinching. "I destroyed us." "Yes," she said softly, "you did." There was no accusation in her tone, only a sad acknowledgement of fact. "You disappeared, Ethan. You were so busy building an empire that you forgot to be a husband, a partner. The man I fell in love with wouldn't have called me a gold digger. He would have been my biggest champion, just as I was his." He flinched at the word gold digger, landing like a physical blow. "Why?" he asked, his voice full of genuine confusion. "After all of that, after how I treated you, why would you do this? Why would you save me?" "I told you," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't save you. I saved the company. I saved the idea that was born on a napkin in our tiny apartment. It was a brilliant idea, Ethan. It deserved to exist. And," she added, a hint of a sad smile touching her lips, "I suppose a part of me hoped that if you were freed from the terror of failure, you might find your way back to being a better man. Not for me, for yourself." It was the most devastatingly generous thing he had ever heard. It wasn't an act of love, not anymore. It was an act of profound, detached grace. She had wanted him to be better, even if she had no intention of being around to see it. "The money," he said, still trying to wrap his head around it. "You had all that, and you never said a word." "It was my grandmother's legacy," she explained. "She taught me that money is a tool, not a trophy. You saw wealth as the end game, the proof of your worth. I saw it as a means to create, to build, to protect what's valuable." I couldn't let your ambition swallow my inheritance, so I built my own firm with my own rules. She gestured to the empty chair where Evelyn had sat. I hired the best people who understood my philosophy. We've funded a dozen companies, mostly led by women, and underrepresented founders who just needed a chance. Ethan listened, humbled and awestruck. While he had been nursing his petty grudge, she had been quietly, effectively changing the world, using her power not to dominate but to empower. She had become everything he had pretended he wanted to be. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "We sell the company," he said, his back to her. "The deal is good. You get your return. A massive one. You can fund 100 more companies with it." "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" He turned around. "I think I'll take some time off, for the first time in a decade." He looked at the watch, then back at her. "Thank you for keeping this safe." "You're welcome." The air between them had shifted. The romantic love was long dead, buried under years of bitterness and misunderstanding. But in its place, something new was beginning to form, a deep, profound, and humbling respect. He finally saw her not as his ex-wife, but as Sophia Rossi, a brilliant strategist, a compassionate investor, and a far better person than he had been. "So, Ms. Rossi," he said, a ghost of a real smile on his face, "shall we go sell our company for a few $1 billion?" Sophia's answering smile was small, but genuine. "I believe that's the correct strategic move, Mr. Hayes." They were no longer husband and wife. They were not friends, not yet. But they were partners finally, in the truest sense of the word, standing on a new foundation, not of shared love, but of shared success, and a hard-won, devastating truth. In the end, Ethan didn't just gain a fortune, he regained a piece of his humanity. The story of Ethan and Sophia isn't just about a shocking business reveal, it's a powerful lesson in perspective. It shows how easily we can become the villains in our own stories, twisting facts to soothe a bruised ego. We often build walls of resentment to protect ourselves from the truth, never realizing that the person on the other side might not be an enemy, but a silent architect of our salvation. Their journey reminds us that the people we underestimate often possess a strength and brilliance we are simply too blind to see.
Some stories feel like they're torn from the pages of a Hollywood script, but this one is chillingly real. It's a story about how a man's cruelest words, meant to bury his ex-wife, ended up becoming the punchline to the biggest joke in New York society. Marcus Thorne, a man who built his empire on perception, told anyone who would listen that his ex-wife Genevieve was past her prime, a 45-year-old woman too old to date. He basked in the glow of his 20-something girlfriend and the pitying glances thrown his ex-wife's way. He thought he had won, but he forgot one simple rule: the brightest spotlights can cast the darkest shadows. And in just 1 week, his shadow would swallow him whole when Genevieve appeared on the cover of Prestige Quarterly with a man whose name could buy and sell Marcus's entire world. This is the story of how a woman erased by her husband became the most envied woman in the city. The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of money and tuberose. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Literacy Foundation, an event that was less about charity and more about the brutal silent calculus of New York's elite social hierarchy. At the center of one of the most sycophantic circles was Marcus Thorne. At 48, he was a man sculpted by ambition and the finest personal trainers. His real estate empire, Thorne Properties, was a testament to his ruthlessness, and his recent divorce was, in his eyes, another successful acquisition freedom. Hanging on his arm was Kinsley Monroe, a 24-year-old influencer whose primary skill was looking perpetually surprised and delighted. Her laughter was a high tinkling sound that punctuated Marcus's booming pronouncements. "The market's soft, but only for the weak," Marcus declared to a rapt audience of hedge fund managers and their wives. "You have to be bold. You have to shed dead weight." He gave Kinsley's waist a possessive squeeze, a gesture that wasn't lost on anyone. He was talking about business, but everyone knew he was also talking about Genevieve. His divorce from Genevieve Reed, his wife of 20 years, had been finalized 6 months prior. For 2 decades, Genevieve had been the silent partner in his ascent. She was the one who'd charmed the old money families, who'd remembered the names of their children and their favorite charities, who'd turned their stark modernist penthouse into a warm, inviting home where deals were sealed over her perfectly curated dinner parties. She had put her own promising career as an art historian on indefinite hold to build the Thorn Empire. Her payment was a summary execution of their marriage delivered on their 20th anniversary. Later in the evening, fueled by vintage champagne and an overinflated sense of self, Marcus was holding court near the silent auction tables. Robert Sinclair, a rival developer, sauntered over, a smirk playing on his lips. "Marcus, good to see you," Robert began, his eyes flicking to Kinsley. "You're looking revitalized." "I am Bob. I cut out the carbs." Marcus chuckled, and his cronies laughed on cue. "And other unnecessary baggage." "Speaking of," Robert lowered his voice conspiratorially, "I saw Genevieve the other day at the Met. She was, well, she was there." The unspoken words hung in the air. She looked drab. She looked lost. She looked old. Marcus's face hardened. The mere mention of her name felt like a stain on his triumphant evening. He wanted the world to see him as a man reborn, not a man who'd simply traded in his wife for a newer model. He needed to control the narrative. "Genevieve," he said, his voice loud enough for several people to turn. He adopted a look of mock pity. "Bless her heart. I wish her the best, I truly do. But let's be honest." He leaned, in his voice a stage whisper that carried across the polished marble. "The woman is 45. She gave me the best years of her life, and I'm grateful." He paused for dramatic effect. "But she's past her expiration date. She's simply too old to be in the dating game now. Who's going to want a woman her age starting over? It's a tragedy, really." The words were a dagger, sharp and precise. A few people winced. Some of the women contemporaries of Genevieve exchanged uncomfortable glances. But the men, they nodded with a grim sort of understanding. Kinsley just giggled, tightening her grip on his arm, her youth a shield against the casual cruelty of his statement. What Marcus didn't notice was the quiet figure standing just behind a large floral arrangement, Penelope Penny Davies, Genevieve's best friend, and a well-connected journalist who had heard every single venomous word. Her eyes narrowed, and she discreetly tapped a note into her phone. Miles away, in a quiet apartment on the Upper West Side that felt more like a library than a home. Genevieve Reed was unaware of the final public nail her ex-husband was hammering into the coffin of her dignity. She was surrounded by books on Renaissance art, the scent of old paper, a comforting balm. The divorce had left her financially secure, but emotionally hollowed out. She had spent 20 years orbiting Marcus, her own light dimmed to make his shine brighter. Now, in the sudden darkness, she felt invisible. Her phone buzzed. It was Penny. "Jen, are you sitting down?" Penny's voice was tight with fury. "I'm always sitting down these days," Genevieve replied with a weak laugh. "What's wrong?" Penny recounted the conversation word for brutal word. Genevieve listened in silence, her hand gripping the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Each syllable was a physical blow. past her expiration date, too old to date. A tragedy. It wasn't just that he had said it was that he had said it with such dismissive, public pity. He hadn't just divorced her, he was trying to erase her, to define her as a relic of his past, a used thing with no future value. When Penny finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "Jen, are you there?" A single tear traced a path down Genevieve's cheek. She wasn't sad. The sadness had been a dull ache for months. This was something new. This was a cold, clarifying rage. "I'm here, Penny," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do?" Genevieve looked around her apartment, at the books that were her only companions, at the reflection in the dark window of a woman she barely recognized. Marcus had built his world on perception. He believed he had crafted her public image as a pitiable, forgotten woman. "I'm going to change the narrative," she said, the words feeling like a vow. "He thinks I'm invisible. He's about to find out what happens when a woman has nothing left to lose." She didn't know how. She didn't have a plan. But for the first time, in a very long time, the woman who had been defined by her husband for 2 decades felt the stirrings of the person she used to be, a woman of intellect, passion, and a will of iron that had merely been dormant, not dead. The tragedy wasn't her age. The tragedy was that she had ever believed her worth was tied to him. And that was a mistake she would never make again. The days following Penny's phone call were a blur of quiet fury. Genevieve's rage didn't manifest in shouting or tears, but in a tense, focused energy that vibrated just beneath her skin. The world outside felt hostile. Every time she stepped out of her apartment, she imagined people looking at her with the same pity Marcus had projected. She saw him everywhere, his smug face on the cover of a business magazine in a newsstand, his name on a new luxury condo development she passed on a walk. He was inescapable. Penny, ever the loyal general, tried to rally her. "We need to get you out there, Jen. Let's go to that new cocktail bar in Soho. It's full of artists and writers, not those finance ghouls Marcus ran with." And do what Penny Genevieve asked, listlessly turning the pages of a book on the works of Artemisia Gentileschi. "Parade myself around like a prize mare, hoping someone notices I'm not quite ready for the glue factory." "Stop that. Stop talking like him," Penny scolded gently. "His words are poison. Don't drink it. It's hard when he's poured it into the city's water supply." Despite her friend's efforts, Genevieve retreated further into her shell. She felt like a ghost, haunting the life she once had. The divorce settlement had been generous, but the money felt like a severance package for a long, thankless job. What she missed wasn't Marcus, but the sense of purpose, the structure, the feeling of being part of something. Now her days were formless, a vast, empty canvas. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she was sorting through old mail, her hand brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope she had ignored for weeks. It was embossed with the logo of the Devereaux Foundation, a private arts organization known for its staggering collection of post-impressionist and modern art. She slit it open with a letter opener, her movements mechanical. It was an invitation, not to a gala or a fundraiser, but to a private symposium, the Patron's Eye, a symposium on private collection and public trust. It was a small exclusive event for curators, academics, and a handful of major patrons. She realized with a jolt that her name was still on their list from her days as a doctoral candidate long before she became Mrs. Marcus Thorne. Her first instinct was to toss it. The thought of walking into a room full of people, of making small talk, was exhausting. She would be an outsider, a relic from a different life. Then her eyes fell on the list of speakers. The keynote address was to be given by Dr. Alistair Finch. The name sent a strange hum through her. Alistair Finch was a legend, but also a ghost. He was a tech billionaire, the architect behind the revolutionary data encryption firm Aegis, a company so powerful and ubiquitous that it ran silently in the background of half the world's digital transactions. But unlike his peers, Finch was pathologically private. He gave no interviews, had no social media presence, and was rarely photographed. His only known public passion was art. He was rumored to possess one of the most significant private art collections in the world, a collection no one had ever really seen. Genevieve had followed his rumored acquisitions for years, the way a sports fan follows their favorite team. He bought with a scholar's eye, not an investor's. He'd once paid a record-breaking sum for a minor landscape by Camille Pissarro, not because it was famous, but because it was the last piece Pissarro painted before his eyesight began to fail, and the brushwork told a story of urgency and fading light. This was a man who understood art not as a commodity, but as a language. The symposium was the next day. An idea wild and terrifying began to form in her mind. What if she went not to meet anyone, not to network, not to prove Marcus wrong, but for herself? To spend a day in a world that had once been her entire universe, to hear people speak the language she loved, to feel for just a few hours like the woman she was before she became a wife. "I'm going out," she told Penny on the phone that night. "A miracle where to, should I get my heels? No. It's something for me." The next day, Genevieve stood before her closet, a place filled with designer dresses and power suits chosen to complement Marcus's image. They felt like costumes for a role she no longer played. At the very back, she found a simple charcoal grey sheath dress, a well-tailored piece she'd bought for her PhD defense years ago. She paired it with low, sensible heels and a simple silver necklace. She didn't look like a billionaire's ex-wife or a socialite. She looked like what she was, a scholar. The symposium was held in the Foundation's private townhouse, a magnificent limestone building off Fifth Avenue. The atmosphere was hushed and academic. No press, no photographers, just the low murmur of intelligent conversation and the scent of old wood and lemon polish. Genevieve felt a wave of anxiety, but also a flicker of homecoming. She slipped into a seat at the back of the small auditorium, content to be anonymous. The panels were fascinating debates on provenance, the ethics of repatriation, the role of digital archives. For the first time in months, Genevieve wasn't thinking about Marcus or Kinsley or what people thought of her. She was completely absorbed, scribbling notes in a small moleskin notebook. The final speaker was Alistair Finch. He was not what she expected. He was tall and lean, perhaps in his early 50s, with silvering hair at his temples and eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. He wore a simple dark tweed jacket, no tie. He didn't speak from a podium, but walked slowly across the stage, his voice calm and measured. His talk was brilliant. He spoke of art as a form of data, a repository of human experience, emotion, and history that was more complex and valuable than any digital code. He argued that collectors were not owners, but custodians with a duty to preserve and eventually to share. During the Q&A, a curator from the Guggenheim asked a question about a recently discovered and disputed Modigliani sketch. The expert consensus was that it was a clever fake. Before Finch could answer, Genevieve felt an irresistible pull. Without even thinking, she raised her hand. A moderator, surprised to see a hand from the back row, nodded at her. "Excuse me, Dr. Finch," she began, her voice clearer than she expected. While the craquelure is inconsistent with Modigliani's typical canvas preparation of the period, has anyone analyzed the pigment composition of the underdrawing? His early work in Livorno, before he moved to Paris, often used a specific Sienese umber that was ground with a higher than usual linseed oil content. It creates a very particular chemical signature that would be almost impossible for a forger to replicate unless they were also a materials historian. The room went silent. A few people turned in their seats to look at her. Her analysis was arcane specific and deeply insightful. It was the kind of detail that only someone who had spent hundreds of hours studying the subject would know. Alistair Finch stopped and looked directly at her. His gaze wasn't appraising or dismissive. It was one of genuine intellectual curiosity. A slow smile spread across his face. That he said, his voice resonating through the quiet room, is an extraordinarily astute observation. No, it has not been analyzed in that way. You've just given the Guggenheim's Conservation Department a new line of inquiry. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Thank you, Reed, she said, her heart hammering. Genevieve Reed. He nodded slowly. Ms. Reed, thank you. As the symposium broke for a small reception, Genevieve, flustered by her own boldness, tried to slip out unnoticed. She had done what she came to do. She had remembered who she was. Ms. Reed. She turned. Alistair Finch was standing there, holding 2 glasses of water. He offered one to her. I was hoping I might have a moment, he said. Your point about the Sienese umber was not just astute, it was brilliant. That's a level of material knowledge one rarely encounters outside of a restoration lab. You're a conservator, no, Genevieve said, taking the glass. An art historian. Or I was. It's been a while. Passion like that doesn't just disappear, he said, his eyes kind. It goes dormant, perhaps. I'd be very interested to hear more about your work. The real work, not the recent hiatus. He said it with such simple, direct respect that Genevieve felt the armor she had built around herself begin to crack. He wasn't looking at her age, her marital status, or her social standing. He was looking at her mind. For the next hour, they stood in a quiet corner of the reception, and for the first time in 20 years, Genevieve talked about art. She talked about the way Gentileschi used chiaroscuro not just for dramatic effect, but as a weapon. She talked about the hidden political allegories in Renaissance portraiture. She forgot where she was. She forgot about Marcus. She forgot that she was supposed to be too old. She was simply Genevieve. And for the first time, she felt that was more than enough. When she finally left the townhouse and stepped out into the evening air, the city looked different. The lights seemed brighter, no longer hostile, but full of promise. She had walked into that building as a ghost, but she was walking out as herself. The days after the symposium were a revelation. Genevieve had expected the encounter with Alistair Finch to be a singular bright spot in her otherwise grey existence. She hadn't expected a follow-up, but 2 days later, a courier delivered a small, flat package to her apartment. Inside was not flowers or champagne, but a first-edition copy of a rare book on the chemical composition of 17th-century pigments. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on heavy cream-colored cardstock. Ms. Reed, your insights have stayed with me. I suspect you might be one of the few people who would appreciate the chapter on Venetian ceruse. If you have the time, I would be honored if you would join me for a private viewing of some pieces that pose similar questions. Sincerely, Alistair Finch. He had included a private number. Genevieve's hand trembled as she held the card. This wasn't a date, not in the traditional sense. It was an invitation into a world she thought was forever closed to her. It was a gesture of profound intellectual respect. She called the number. Their first date was not at a trendy restaurant or a flashy club. He sent a discreet car to pick her up, and it took her not to a public museum, but to a climate-controlled, unmarked warehouse in Queens. Inside was a private gallery that took her breath away. It was a museum of one. Rothko's bled color on one wall, a Giacometti sculpture stood hauntingly in the center of the room, and a triptych by Francis Bacon screamed silently from another. Alistair was waiting for her dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. There were no assistants, no curators, just him. "I wanted you to see them without distraction," he explained, "to hear what they have to say." For 3 hours, they walked and talked. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. He wanted her opinion, her visceral reaction, her academic interpretation. He would stand before a painting, his head tilted, and say, "I see the despair here. But you mentioned something about Gentileschi using darkness as a weapon. Do you see that in this soutine? Is the darkness a void, or is it an active presence?" Genevieve, who had spent years making small talk about golf handicaps and summering in the Hamptons, felt her mind unfurl like a sail catching wind. She was articulate, passionate, and brilliant. She challenged his interpretations, offered her own, and pointed out details he, the owner, had never noticed. This became their routine. Their courtship was a series of quiet, extraordinary adventures. One day, he flew her on his private jet to Chicago, not for a shopping spree on Michigan Avenue, but to spend 2 hours in a conservation lab at the Art Institute, looking at a newly acquired Degas sculpture under a microscope. Another evening, they didn't go out at all. He came to her apartment, and they sat on her floor, surrounded by her art books, arguing playfully about the influence of Japanese woodblock prints on Van Gogh. He never once mentioned her past, her divorce, or Marcus. It was as if her life had only begun the moment she stood up at that symposium. He was interested in the Genevieve Reed who existed outside of any man's shadow. He was captivated by her mind, her passion, and the quiet strength she was only just rediscovering in herself. "You have an astonishing eye, Genevieve," he told her one evening as they stood before a somber, beautiful portrait by an unknown Flemish master. "It's a gift. To let it lie dormant is a crime against an entire field of study. I didn't think anyone cared about this field anymore," she admitted, her voice soft. "Or about me." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "The world is loud, and it celebrates the wrong things. It celebrates noise over substance, perception over reality. But that doesn't mean substance and reality have lost their value. It just means they're harder to find." He paused, his gaze gentle and infinitely more precious when you do. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was living in a very different reality. His life with Kinsley was a whirlwind of public appearances and performative happiness. They were at every opening, every launch party, their photos splashed across gossip sites. Marcus loved it. He felt powerful, desired a king with his young queen. He heard whispers about Genevieve through the grapevine. Robert Sinclair had mentioned seeing her with some academic type. Marcus laughed it off. "Good for her," he told Robert over a game of squash, his voice dripping with condescension. "Glad she's found a friend. Probably some dusty professor. As long as she's happy, right?" He genuinely believed it. He couldn't conceive of a world where Genevieve could find someone who wasn't a pale, pathetic shadow of himself. In his mind, he was the pinnacle. Anyone she found would be a downgrade proof that he had been right to leave her. Kinsley, whose entire worldview was shaped by social media metrics, reinforced his delusion. Like, who would even date someone that old? For real, she'd said one night while scrolling through her phone. No offense to Jen, but her like brand is just expired. Marcus had nodded in agreement, basking in the validation. He was so blinded by his own ego that he failed to notice the signs. He didn't notice that the quiet, deferential woman he had divorced was slowly being replaced by a confident, engaged intellectual. He didn't notice because he had never truly seen her in the first place. The turning point came one evening at Alistair's home, a stunning, minimalist townhouse that valued light and space over opulent display. He had commissioned a report on the feasibility of a new global arts foundation, one dedicated to funding material historical research and provenance verification. He handed the thick binder to Genevieve. "I'm thinking of endowing a new foundation," he said simply. "I believe it could change the way we protect and understand art, but a foundation is only as good as the person who leads it." He looked at her directly. "I want you to be its director, Genevieve. I'll provide the capital, you provide the vision. You would have complete autonomy." Genevieve was speechless. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a restoration. It was him handing her the tools to rebuild the part of her life she had been forced to abandon. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a year, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "Alistair, you don't have to answer now," he said kindly, "but know that I see you, Genevieve Reed, and I think you are extraordinary." Later that night, as they stood on his terrace overlooking the city, he gently took her hand. It wasn't the possessive grip of Marcus, but a warm, steady presence. "There's another reason I want you to run the foundation," he said, his voice a low murmur against the city's hum. "It would make it much easier to coordinate our schedules, assuming you'd be willing to marry me." Genevieve's heart stopped. It wasn't a grand, dramatic proposal. It was quiet, certain, and utterly sincere. It was a proposal from a man who wanted a partner, not a possession. He wasn't asking for the woman who ran his home, but the woman who would run a global foundation. He was asking for her. She looked at his face, illuminated by the city lights, and saw her future. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about respect. It was about being seen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alistair, I will marry you." They sealed their engagement not with a diamond ring selfie for Instagram, but with a quiet toast of champagne, their conversation turning immediately to the exciting plans for their future and for the foundation. They were a team. Neither of them gave a single thought to Marcus Thorne. But in a different part of the city, the gears of fate were grinding, preparing for a revelation that would shatter one man's carefully constructed world and expose the hollowness at its core. The quiet courtship was over. The storm was about to break. The next week began like any other for Marcus Thorne. He woke up in his sterile, glass-walled penthouse, Kinsley still asleep beside him, her face smushed into a silk pillowcase. He went through his morning routine with the precision of a machine: a cold plunge, a custom-blended protein shake, and a scan of the financial news on his tablet. He was on top of the world, and he knew it. A major deal to develop a new luxury tower on the west side was nearing completion, a deal that would cement his legacy as one of the city's premier developers. He arrived at his office at Thorne Properties, a monument of steel and ego in Midtown, feeling invincible. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Chloe, greeted him with his usual espresso. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. Your 10 o'clock with the zoning board is confirmed." "Excellent, Chloe. Any fires I need to put out?" he asked, striding toward his corner office. "No, sir. Everything is quiet." But everything was not quiet. Out on the newsstands of New York City, a different kind of story was breaking. It wasn't on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or in the gossip columns of the Post. It was on the cover of Prestige Quarterly, a sophisticated, influential magazine read by the old money and the truly powerful. It was the kind of magazine Marcus desperately wanted to be in, but never was. They favored substance over flash. The cover was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a black and white photograph shot by a world-renowned photographer. In it, Genevieve Reed was laughing, not a posed, self-conscious laugh, but one of genuine, unadulterated joy. She wasn't wearing a ball gown, but a simple, elegant cashmere sweater. Her hair was loose, and her face, the face of a 45-year-old woman, was luminous. Her hand was resting on the arm of a man who sat beside her, his own expression one of quiet, profound adoration. That man was Alistair Finch. The headline in bold, classic font read, "Silence Broken, the enigmatic Alistair Finch on Love, Art, and the Woman Who Changed Everything," announcing his engagement to scholar Genevieve Reed. The first tremor of Marcus's downfall happened not in his office, but in the elite sports club where his rival Robert Sinclair was having a post-workout breakfast. Sinclair choked on his avocado toast when his associate slid the magazine across the table. His eyes widened first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He immediately took a photo of the cover with his phone. The text message arrived on Marcus's phone just as he was sitting down for his meeting. It was from Sinclair. No words, just the picture of the magazine cover. Marcus stared at it. His brain couldn't process the image. Genevieve laughing with... He squinted. He didn't recognize the man at first. He looked like some college professor. Then he read the headline. Alistair Finch. The name hit him like a physical blow. Alistair Finch, the reclusive tech god. The man whose net worth was rumored to be in the 12-figure range, a number that made Marcus's own considerable fortune look like pocket change. It wasn't possible. This had to be a joke, a sophisticated prank. Genevieve, his mousy academic ex-wife, who he'd publicly pitied as being too old to date, was engaged to one of the richest, most private, and most respected men on the planet, Mr. Thorne, one of the zoning officials said, looking at him with concern. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." Marcus shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion and rage. "Fine," he managed to croak out. "Let's begin." But he couldn't concentrate. The words in the meeting were just noise. His mind was racing, replaying his own arrogant pronouncements at the charity gala. Past her expiration date, a tragedy. He had said it so loudly, so publicly. He had defined her as worthless. And now she was on the cover of Prestige Quarterly, not as a tragic figure, but as the chosen partner of a man who personified value. The news spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. Phones buzzed from the Upper East Side to Wall Street. The story was irresistible. It wasn't just about the astonishing upgrade in wealth. It was the poetic justice of it all. Everyone had heard Marcus's cruel remarks. Everyone had seen him flaunt his young girlfriend. Now, the tables hadn't just turned, they had been launched into orbit. By the time Marcus returned to his office, the atmosphere had changed. The usual deference from his staff was now tinged with something else, a mixture of shock pity and a morbid curiosity. Chloe couldn't meet his eyes. "Hold all my calls," he barked, slamming his office door shut. He ripped open his laptop and found the article online. It was worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't a simple announcement. It was a beautifully written profile detailing Genevieve's brilliant academic past and her sharp, insightful mind. It quoted Finch extensively. Genevieve possesses a clarity of thought and a passion for truth that is exceptionally rare, Finch was quoted as saying. The world is full of people who shout. She is one of the few who knows how to listen, how to see. Marrying her is the most intelligent decision I have ever made. The article went on to announce the formation of the Finch Reed Arts Foundation, with Genevieve Reed named as its inaugural director, endowed with a starting fund of $500 million. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Director of a $500 million foundation. He had reduced her to her age, and Alistair Finch had elevated her for her intellect. He hadn't just lost the PR battle, he had been annihilated. He was no longer the successful man who had dumped his aging wife. He was now the idiot who had let a priceless treasure slip through his fingers. He was the punchline. His personal phone rang. It was Kinsley, her voice a panicky squeal. "Marcus, have you seen it? Everyone is texting me. Jessica from my yoga class. She sent me the cover. Is it real? Is your ex-wife really marrying that guy? The guy who owns the internet?" "It's an exaggeration, Kinsley," he snapped, his patience gone. "Well, everyone is talking about it, and they're talking about what you said at the gala. It's super awkward for me now." Her concern wasn't for him, or even for Genevieve. It was for her own social standing, which had been inextricably tied to his. Suddenly, being Marcus Thorne's girlfriend wasn't such a great look. He was no longer the powerful victor, he was the cosmic fool. The final blow came an hour later. It was a call from his lead investor on the West Side Tower project, a conservative old money firm. "Marcus," the man said, his voice cold and distant. "We're seeing some troubling chatter. This public situation with your ex-wife, it's a bad look. It speaks to a certain lack of judgment." "What? It's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with business," Marcus sputtered. "In our world, character is business," the investor replied flatly. "Alistair Finch is on the board of 2 of our parent companies. We can't be in business with a man who is now, for all intents and purposes, a public embarrassment to him. We're invoking the character clause in our contract. We're pulling our funding." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone in his hand. The West Side Tower, his legacy project, the deal that was supposed to make him untouchable, was gone. It had evaporated in a single morning, all because of a magazine cover. He had built his empire on perception, and in the blink of an eye, the perception had shifted. He wasn't the shark, he was the chum. He leaned forward and put his head in his hands. The silence of his opulent office suddenly deafening. He had told everyone his ex-wife was a tragedy. He was just now realizing the tragedy was his own. Humiliation is a powerful acid. For Marcus Thorne, it burned through his ego, his reputation, and now his finances. The collapse of the West Side Tower deal sent shockwaves through his company. Thorne Properties was heavily leveraged banking on the success of that project. The public withdrawal of a major investor on a character clause was a signal to every other bank and a partner. Marcus Thorne was a bad bet. Credit lines tightened. Whispers of insolvency started to circulate. His personal life was disintegrating just as quickly. Kinsley, whose allegiance was to status, not to a man, saw the writing on the wall. Their arguments became more frequent and vicious. "This is your fault, Marcus," she'd shrieked during one explosive fight. "You just had to open your big mouth about your ex. You made us a joke. Do you know what it's like to go to brunch and have everyone pity you too?" 2 weeks after the magazine cover dropped, Kinsley was gone. She didn't even say goodbye in person, just a short text message before a moving van quietly emptied her belongings from the penthouse. Her Instagram was scrubbed of all photos of him, replaced by cryptic posts about new beginnings and cutting out toxic energy. Broken and increasingly desperate, Marcus did the one thing he never thought he would do. He tried to contact Genevieve. His first attempts were calls and texts, all of which went unanswered. He then sent a long, rambling email, a pathetic mix of feigned remorse and veiled threats about their shared history. It, too, was met with silence. Finally, he resorted to the unthinkable. He went to her apartment building on the Upper West Side, a place he hadn't been since their lawyers had divided their assets. He buzzed her apartment, his heart pounding with a toxic cocktail of rage and desperation. A voice answered through the intercom, but it wasn't Genevieve's. It was the calm, steady voice of a security professional. "Who is calling for Ms. Reed?" "It's Marcus Thorne. Her ex-husband. I need to speak with her. It's urgent." There was a pause. "Ms. Reed is not accepting visitors. Please leave the premises, Mr. Thorne. Just tell her I'm here. Tell her I need to apologize." He yelled at the small metal box. "If you do not leave, we will be forced to call the police." Defeated, Marcus stumbled back onto the street. He was locked out, not just from her building, but from her life, from the world of respectability he had once commanded. He looked up at her window, imagining her inside, living a life that was now completely inaccessible to him. Did she hate him? Was she enjoying his downfall? The truth was, Genevieve rarely thought of him at all. Her life was full. She was deep in the throes of launching the foundation, recruiting a world-class board, and reviewing grant proposals from scholars around the globe. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, research, and passionate debate with Alistair, who was not just her fiancé, but her most enthusiastic, intellectual sparring partner. Her happiness was not built on Marcus's ruin. It was built on her own rediscovery. The news of his professional and personal collapse reached her, of course, through Penny, who delivered it with a grim satisfaction. Genevieve felt a distant, detached sadness, the way one might feel hearing about the misfortune of a former colleague from a job long since past. He was a chapter of her life that was now closed, and she had no desire to reread it. One evening, she and Alistair were having a quiet dinner at home. Genevieve brought up Marcus's failed attempts to contact her. "He seems to be unraveling," she said, not with malice, but with a clinical sort of observation. Penny said the West Side Tower deal was the final nail in the coffin for his company. Alistair took a sip of his wine, his expression unreadable. "The lead investors in that project, the parent firm, is a private equity group called North Star Holdings. They value discretion and character above all else. I'm surprised they acted so quickly based on what was essentially high society gossip," Genevieve mused. Alistair Vuam set his glass down and looked at her. "It wasn't just gossip, Genevieve. I sit on the board of North Star Holdings." Genevieve stared at him, the implications slowly dawning on her. It felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "Alistair, did you—" "I made no demands," he said, his voice calm and precise. "I never would. Your revenge, if you can call it that, was living a life so full and happy that he became irrelevant. That was your victory, and it was perfect." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "However, at our quarterly board meeting, the subject of our portfolio's risk exposure came up. I simply shared my opinion as a board member that any venture associated with a man who displayed such profoundly poor judgment, cruelty, and public instability as Marcus Thorne was, by definition, an unacceptable risk. Character, as I believe they told him, is business. The board agreed. It was a simple, logical business decision. It was the ultimate twist. Marcus's downfall wasn't cosmic karma or bad luck. It was a quiet, clinical, and utterly devastating checkmate executed by a man who operated on a level Marcus couldn't even comprehend. Alistair hadn't acted out of petty revenge for a slight against his fiancée. He had acted as a titan of industry, protecting his investments from the liability of a flawed character. He had used the language Marcus understood, money and power, to pass a sentence that Marcus himself had written with his own cruel words. Genevieve was silent for a long moment, processing the quiet lethality of Alistair's move. He hadn't stooped to Marcus's level. He had simply operated from his own, and in doing so, had erased him from the board. It wasn't an act of passion, it was an act of consequence. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. For what he asked, his eyes searching hers. "For seeing a bad investment and protecting your portfolio," she replied, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. He smiled back, a rare wide grin that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. The ghost of Marcus Thorne had finally been exorcised, not with a shout, but with the quiet closing of a ledger. Weeks later, Penny sent Genevieve a link to a tabloid article. The headline was sensational: bankrupt real estate tycoon Marcus Thorne spotted moving into New Jersey rental. The accompanying photo was grainy, showing a haggard, unshaven Marcus carrying a cardboard box into a modest suburban townhouse. He was alone. Genevieve looked at the picture of the man who had declared her old and worthless. He had chased youth and perception and had lost everything of real value. She had embraced her age, her intellect, her true self, and had gained a world of substance and happiness. She closed the link without a flicker of triumph, only a quiet sense of finality. She turned back to the stack of proposals on her desk, her mind already on the future, a future she was building on her own terms. The narrative was at last hers to write. 6 months later, the Finch Reed Arts Foundation held its inaugural exhibition. The event was not held in a stuffy hotel ballroom, but in a beautifully restored cast-iron building in Chelsea, its industrial bones now housing a state-of-the-art gallery. The air buzzed not with the brittle chatter of social climbers, but with the excited murmur of artists, curators, and academics from around the world. The exhibition, curated and conceived entirely by Genevieve, was titled Palimpsest: The Stories Beneath. It was a stunning collection of works where artists had painted over older canvases or where restoration had revealed hidden histories. At the center of the room, on a simple dais, stood Genevieve Reed, dressed in a striking deep blue gown that was elegant rather than ostentatious. She radiated a calm, self-possessed authority. She was not Alistair Finch's wife tonight. She was Director Reed, and this was her stage. A palimpsest, she began, her clear voice carrying through the wrapped hall, is a manuscript on which later writing has been superimposed on effaced earlier writing. It is a metaphor for memory, for history, for the truth that what is erased is never truly gone. It remains waiting for a careful eye to uncover it. In the audience, Alistair watched her, his pride a quiet, palpable force. He stood not at the front, but slightly to the side, allowing her the full spotlight. He was not the source of her light. He was simply happy to stand in its warmth. Near the back of the crowd, a familiar face watched with a look of stunned disbelief. It was Robert Sinclair Marcus's old rival. He'd wangled an invitation, because this was now the most important room to be in New York. He remembered Marcus's sneering words at the gala with perfect clarity. Too old to date. A tragedy. He looked at the radiant, brilliant woman commanding the attention of the art world's most powerful figures and felt a chill. Marcus had seen a faded manuscript and tried to burn it. Alistair Finch had seen the same manuscript, recognized its priceless value, and given its author the tools to write her own magnificent new story. The artists featured here teach us that nothing is ever truly finished, Genevieve concluded. We are all layered texts capable of being revised, restored, and reread in a new, more brilliant light. Thank you. The applause was thunderous and genuine. As Genevieve stepped down, she was surrounded by well-wishers. A venerable director from the Louvre congratulated her on her vision. A young, explosive artist whose work she championed hugged her with gratitude. After a few minutes, Alistair made his way through the crowd to her side. He didn't say a word, just offered her a glass of champagne, his eyes conveying everything. "You were brilliant," he murmured, for her ears only. "I was me," she said, a smile of pure contentment on her face. It was the simplest and most profound truth. Her past was not erased, but it no longer defined her. It was merely the effaced text beneath a far more interesting story, one whose most exciting chapters were still to be written. In the end, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a powerful lesson in value. Marcus Thorne believed a woman's worth was tied to her youth and her proximity to a powerful man. He saw Genevieve as an asset whose value had depreciated. What he failed to understand is that things like integrity, intellect, and grace don't have an expiration date. They accrue interest. Genevieve's triumph wasn't marrying a billionaire. That was just the dramatic final act. Her real victory was rediscovering her own worth in a world that tried to tell her she had none. She didn't need a man to save her. She just needed to remember the brilliant woman she was before she ever met Marcus. Her story is a testament to the fact that the best revenge is not stooping to their level, but building a life so magnificent that they are no longer a part of your view. What did you think of Genevieve's incredible journey? Let us know in the comments below.